Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Is Starting a Nonprofit Right for You? For those of you who are returning grant space webinar participants, a warm welcome back. And to those of you here for the first time, I'm so glad that you're joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Civetta, and I'm a program associate here at Candid, based in New York City. And I'll be supporting today's webinar by managing polls, as well as collecting questions that you ask along the way and posing them during our Q&A. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, we want to share with you that we've joined forces with GuideStar to form a new single organization called Candid. Together, we have over 88 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. We believe that an effective social sector is critical for a thriving society, and we believe in the importance of solutions for the sector by the sector. With Candid, nonprofits, foundations, donors, and the public can all be on the same page. Through research, collaboration, and training, Candid connects people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do it. With Candid, you can find funding with Foundation Directory online and search 140,000 funders and 12 million grants. And you can increase your visibility with the funder community by maintaining your GuideStar nonprofit profile. You can also continue to strengthen your nonprofit by participating in grants-based trainings to move your fundraising skills to the next level. To learn more about our capacity building training programs, you can visit grantspace.org. We offer courses across the country at a location near you. I would now like to turn the controls over to our presenter for today, Dave Holmes. And as I do so, I'd like to go ahead and introduce him. Dave Holmes is Cleveland lead here at Candid, and where he coordinates training, reference, and research services for the Midwest region. He returned to Candid in 2015 from a position as senior consultant at Grants Plus, writing and doing research for a variety of large and small nonprofit clients. In his initial tenure, Dave served in various roles, including regional training specialist, interim director of Foundation Center Cleveland, and director of capacity and leadership development. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dave.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. This is our Is Starting a Nonprofit Right for You class. And even before we get started, I want to know a little bit more about all of you. So we have a poll that I'm going to ask Elizabeth to share with you right now.
Thanks, Dave. So as we said, we want to get to know you a little bit better. So which best describes you? What brought you here? I've already started a nonprofit. Perhaps you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, or perhaps you're already involved in the process. And maybe you're just curious about what it takes to start a nonprofit, or just curious about the social sector in general. So Dave, it looks like 42% of the room are thinking about starting a nonprofit. 34% are actually just interested in learning more. And we have a couple folks who've already started or they're in the process as well. Any initial thoughts?
Well, that is great, actually. This is for all of you, really, this particular class, because it's going to go into detail about all the different levels of what you need to know. And even after you've started, even after you've become a legal nonprofit, there are things that you should check on to make sure that you are doing effectively. So we're going to make sure we go over all of those different things and show you where to go to find more information. All right. So we're going to go back to the slides now. Thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to talk about what we're going to learn today. So by the end of the training, you should be able to do a few things, and I'm going to show them off to you as we go on here. So one of the things you should be able to do is you should be able to outline the steps required to start a nonprofit. You should be able to tell what are the things that you need to do to make sure that you're an effective nonprofit that can sustain itself. We will also give you an opportunity to understand that it's not for everybody. So if you're still thinking about it, you should be able to assess the alternatives to starting a nonprofit. Some of the things that you could do instead, some of the ways that you could work and still be effective in the community. There is a resource that we're going to show off today called the Nonprofit Startup Assessment Tool. It's a new tool that we've recently developed with assistance from the Kauffman Foundation. We're going to be showing you how to use that. It's a free tool that any of you can log into and use to determine where you are in the startup process if you're not sure, and the next steps that you should take if you want to move forward. And finally, we're going to show you where you can access additional resources to help you as you go through all of this. And there are handouts that you can download for this. In addition to the slides, there's a nice resource handout you should take advantage and download. Before we get any further, though, I want to say that I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. So I can't really interpret the legality of anything that you're going to do. I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask any questions that you have, but you should know that certain things are the purview of a lawyer or an accountant. I am going to answer the questions as best I can related to my experience in working with nonprofits. So let's get started. First thing I want to talk about is what a nonprofit organization is. And this is the official legal definition as the IRS holds it out to. IRS defines nonprofit organizations in their code, and the section of the code they define it in is 501c3, which you should be familiar with because that's often shorthand for referring to a nonprofit organization as a 501c3. And according to the IRS, when you form a public charity, which is another word for nonprofits, it should focus on its exempt purposes, by which we mean you have to be set up to benefit others rather than yourself. You have to be organized to focus on something educational or something charitable, and you have to be operated as that is your main mission and your main focus. Also, you can't really do anything to benefit private individuals. You can't start a charity just with the idea to get rich, though it would be difficult to do that anyway. Shareholders or private interests. It's really about making sure that the people that you're set up to benefit get most of the benefit. You can get paid. Certainly, most people that I know that work for nonprofits get paid, but that can't be the number one reason why the nonprofit exists. And finally, you can't be solely linked to a political organization. You can advocate for policies and political issues, and there's clear laws set out that'll tell you how to do that, but you can't say something like vote for this person. That cannot be the way that you do it. If you're not sure about this or not sure about any of the other things related to this, the IRS website, which is one of the links on your resource page, irs.gov, has a wonderful section on charities and nonprofits that takes you through a lot of the legal details. We're going to try and go past a lot of those because we don't want to get in depth with it, but we want to make sure that you know where do you find it. So irs.gov, there's a little button at the top that says charities and nonprofits, so take advantage of that. Speaking of the IRS, this is what most people think of when they think about starting a nonprofit. They think about the legal steps. They think about having to establish a board of directors who are going to run the organization. So depending on what state you are, that can be 3 people, it can be more people that are going to be in charge of managing the organization. You put together bylaws and board policies and incorporate within your state. So the first step is really incorporating with the Secretary of State's office for your state. In that, you will get an EIN, an employee identification number from the IRS, so that you can be an official business, and there's a form that you submit. And then once you're incorporated in your state, you file for federal tax exemption, 501c3 status. And the form, there's a couple of different varieties of the form, but it's form 1023. And this is where you go through the process and get the official status. When we talk about these steps, we always make sure to recommend that you don't do this alone, by the way, because it is difficult sometimes. It's easier than it used to be to understand the forms, but even so, the Form 1023 has a lot of specific questions that need to be answered in a certain way in order to make sure that you are representing yourself in the most effective way. So we recommend that you get help from somebody with legal experience, particularly nonprofit legal experience. Lawyers aren't cheap, but I would suggest you reach out to your local bar association in the city or location where you are and look to see if they have any assistance, any nonprofit assistance they can recommend, or any pro bono free assistance they can recommend. Remember, though, that this is not the only place where you can find this information. You can go to irs.gov to get more information. There's also a lot of publishers that specialize in step-by-step guides to starting a nonprofit. NOLO, Nolo, is one that publishes a lot of books that take you step by step through the forms. So with that and some legal advice and a little bit of patience and a little bit of money, you can become a legal nonprofit. But this makes you only legally a nonprofit. Most people think, well, that's enough. All the rest of the stuff, I'll just, I'll get to it. This is what I have to do right now, and this is what I'll do. That's not really the best way to think about it. This is the legal stuff, and it enables you to move forward legally and get grants and things like that. But it doesn't really talk about what makes a real nonprofit. So that's what I'm going to go into now. You should always put a plan together. All of you are in slightly different places when it comes to your plans. That's okay, because each of these sections is something that you should consider throughout the lifetime of your nonprofit and make sure in making yourself as clear as possible when you do this. At Candid, we tend to look at nonprofits in a lot of different ways, but a lot of the times we look at them in one specific way. Is it something that anybody else would fund? Would anyone like to invest in this plan? Every item you see here on the list is something you should consider and make sure that you continue to consider throughout the lifetime of your organization. We're going to take them in this order, and in the order that you should probably think about them as you're creating from beginning to reality and to going out and being a nonprofit in the world. The first thing you think about, and the first thing that we always start about, is talking about the mission. The mission is the most important part of what you do. And I'm going to put up an official definition of a mission here. And this is coming from our own website, grantspace.org. You can read this, but basically the mission is what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. If you had to explain what you do, who you're helping, what you do, and why you do it, that's your mission. That explains anybody from the IRS to somebody on an elevator asking you what you do to somebody wanting to fund you, what your organization stands for. That's what a mission is. And sometimes this takes the longest to put together for any organization because it should summarize everything. It should be able to state all of the different things that you do on a day-to-day basis. One thing that we warn against that comes up again and again is mission creep or mission drift. When you start an organization, people are going to judge what you do based on what you say your mission is. And if you suddenly slide towards doing one thing and then you stop that and you do another thing and neither of them really fit with your overall mission, you can cause a lot of trouble for yourself. You can cause funders to not want to invest in you because they don't believe that you believe in your mission strongly enough. So the mission communicates what you do. The vision is another part of thinking about what you do, and it goes further. It goes to the point where you think about, okay, if we are successful, if we do day to day what we're set out to do, in the long distance future, what is the world going to look like when we're successful? Is it going to be a world where every child can read by age 3, or a world where clean water is available to everyone? This is not something that happens every day or tomorrow or any of those kind of things. This is the vision that you have for the future. You're not going to accomplish it tomorrow, but if you keep doing your mission, this is what you hope to achieve in the very long run. Both of these, the mission and the vision, are rooted in values. And the reason we bring up values is that this is how you connect with the people that are going to invest in you. And by investors, I mean people who want to join your board of directors, people who want to donate to you, people who want to be a part of your organization, maybe be an employee, people who want to keep supporting your organization for the future. You are connecting with them through your mission and vision and connecting with their values, the beliefs that you hold. It's very important to know about these because they come into play when you start to seek for future support. For example, Bill Gates has been very clear about his foundation's values. He and his wife, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they value international health, they value the use of technology, They value a lot of different things that they fund, and they fund nonprofits to carry out the actions related to those values. So if you have a mission that fits within the values scheme of the Gates Foundation and carries it out where they have those specific beliefs, you are going to do their work for them. And that's essentially what you're going for. Just because, by the way, that you're interested in the same things, youth or seniors or clean water or clean air, doesn't mean that you share the values of every different organization. You yourself might know of an organization that's similar to yours, but maybe has a different value. Well, we like youth to be an integral part of everything we do, as opposed to that other organization who wants youth to kind of be seen and not heard, maybe in a more of a very rigid structure. Just because they're working with the same people or doing the same kind of things doesn't mean they share your values. It's important to know about this because as you get into this further and further, you are looking to try and find a fit between all the people that share your values who can help you carry out your mission, help you achieve your vision. So you have to be very careful when you read and learn about different organizations that you are connecting and making those values clear. We have a little exercise usually at this time. I'm not going to do it in this webinar, but if you haven't laid out your mission, vision, and values for your organization, I recommend that you take some time and do that. Even on a spare sheet of paper, just make sure if you're starting and thinking about what you're going to do, make it clear to yourself because that's going to make everything else that you do with your nonprofit a lot easier. Okay, so we're going to move on here and we're going to talk about what's called an environmental scan. An environmental scan is kind of a scary phrase, but in essence, what it means is that now that I'm clear on what I want to do, is there anyone else that is doing this work? Is there anybody else I can work with or anybody else that I need to know about before I move forward? Some people just kind of willfully don't want to do this because they're like, well, I don't want anybody else to get confused with me. I don't want anybody to steal my ideas. I want to be completely independent. And I'll have to say that there is no real way to be completely independent when you're running a nonprofit. You have to think about the other people that are doing the work. You have to think who else in your community is doing something similar to what you're doing. How do you differentiate yourself from them? Why would somebody want to fund you rather than somebody else? So you know what's going on in your community. You need to be able to say, what is it that makes me distinct? Maybe you're modeling what you do on somebody else. But the important thing to know is how does what you do, why is it necessary for you to start your organization? Are you being innovative? Are you doing something that nobody else has done? Or are you duplicating somebody but not copying somebody who's doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same neighborhood? The important point is you want people to know, why should they support you? What would happen if you didn't exist? What bad things are going to go on? Now, it's important to know where to find this information. You can just look around and say, well, I did some Google searches and I've never really seen anybody who does what I do, but I have talked to a lot of different nonprofits. And remember that the funders you're going to go to also know about a lot of different nonprofits. So I would take care to do some pretty extensive research. Google is one thing. GuideStar, which is now part of our organization, Candid, is another place to go where you can find lots of key information about nonprofits and how they function. GuideStar.org is the website. It's easy to search to find out information about different nonprofits in your area. If you're not even sure who else is around you, you might want to try connecting with the 211 service. 211 is a nationwide information service, usually coordinated by the United Ways in your area. So it's usually 211 as a phone number, but you might want to look online to see if there's a 211 for your city or your area online. That's a place where I usually go to find out who else is doing something similar. So you call 211 and you say, is anybody else doing after-school programs with a focus on equestrian in my region? And they'll look it up and see if they can find anybody to connect you with. Two reasons why you do this: you find out how you're distinct from them, how you would be distinct from them in the future. You also make connections for collaboration and for sharing the work in the future, not giving the work to somebody else, but showing where you fit, what's your niche with that. So doing that research, if you don't do it early on, you may find yourself being asked, why are we giving you money? Isn't X just like you? You want to find out about X as soon as possible and find out how they're not like you. All right. So I'm going to move on a little bit and talk more about the plans. And the next part of the plan is an important one. It's about board members. Now, board members are the essential working parts of a nonprofit. Most nonprofits don't begin with a big staff, even one employee. They begin without a staff. They rely on board members and volunteers as their expertise, as their donors, as the people who are actually working to do work. The roles that board members do tend to be everything that makes the public charity or public. They represent the community that you're serving. They're legally essential because if you want to start a nonprofit, you have to have a board of directors, and they're people that are officially in charge of the organization. There's a lot of people that are starting nonprofits who don't know this, that are thinking, well, I have this idea, I came up with this vision and mission, and I'm going to do this. Well, in the United States, when you start a nonprofit organization, you actually have to have a couple other people at least who are really going to be in charge of that, who could fire you if they decide to do that. Not that they would, because they probably share your values. They probably come from people who are equally excited about what you're doing. But they are going to be the ones responsible for upholding that mission, upholding the organization's mission and making sure it keeps going. Now, I don't know any organization who's completely and utterly satisfied from the beginning with their board of directors. A lot of the times early on, organizations are trying to build that board. And then later on, they're trying to expand it and they're trying to find a representative that gives the things that they need. And those things tend to be remembered easily with little mnemonic devices like time, talent, and treasure. I'm sure you've heard about that. Somebody who's willing to give the time that's necessary to do the work, who has a talent that they bring in, fundraising or management skills or any kind of talent that you need, a legal acumen, and then treasure that are able to give and get money for you. Finding board members is often what a lot of nonprofits never really give up. One place I'm going to refer you to is an organization called Board Source, and their website is boardsource.org. Board Source is the national authority on nonprofit boards. When I have a question about how a board should be organized or how should I recruit board members, how should I encourage board members to donate to my organization, which they all should do, by the way, I go to Board Source because Board Source has a wonderful website, a lot of great publications that talk about this. And they're where you can find out more details. You can get guides for the roles of your board members. You can find out more information about the best ways to educate your board. They also can help you get stimulated about finding board members in your area. Another place that I tend to go for finding board members is to a volunteer organization or a volunteer matching organization, which a lot of cities have, that match people who want to volunteer with volunteer opportunities. A lot of times they will help you find board members. Oftentimes there are organizations that might specialize in that. United Ways often do it. Find out who it is that you are doing that. Sorry, I just got handed a message from one of my coworkers. Moving on here. Board members are the start. Staff members are what most people want. They want to be able to say, well, I've got a staff, I can pay myself and I can pay the people that are doing the work. One of the troubles that we run into is that you don't have the money when you first start to pay for staff members. So if you're going to do this, understand that staff members don't come right away. They come as you get structured and they come as your organizations grow. But if you don't have the finances and fundraising, you're not going to have that. Think about all the people who can help you out, though, in keeping your organization going. Not everybody can be a board member. Not everybody has the time. Not everybody has the talent or the treasure. Not everybody has the skills to help you. That doesn't mean that they can't help you unless they become your paid staff. A lot of organizations have an advisory committee, people that can bring different points of view, even if they don't have the time to spend on your board and become part of that. There's some great resources on our GrantSpace website. Grantspace.org is the website. And there's a section in there called the knowledge base, which I'll show you in just a little while. The knowledge base has detailed information and answers to questions. And one of the ones is, how can I find board members for my nonprofit? So you might want to take a look there if you're learning more about that as you go on. Okay. So let's imagine that you started to build your board, you started to get your organization together. What else is part of your plan? Well, a key part of it is understanding the need in the community. This is not your need, by the way. This is not, I need a lot of cash to keep my organization going. The number one concern you should have is being able to talk about the need that you are responding to in the community. You have to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to document it. So it's one thing to say, well, I think that my neighborhood has a lot of people that should be doing something else. There's a lot of people that seem to not have jobs. They don't have a lot of things. It's one thing to think that and to be able to talk about it. It's another thing to know it based on talking to people, based on statistics, based on gathering the information that proves the need. Because as you start putting a case for support together, a case for funding for your organization, you have to be able to say, here's why I know this is necessary. Here's why I know this is a need. Government agencies like the Census Bureau or the city or county that you're in probably have statistics that you can use to document specific need. If you want to provide services to single parents, they probably have statistics on single parent families. Maybe you're documenting lead levels in the people that live in your area. A lot of places have statistics on that kind of information, but you can get statistics from a lot of different places. You can get them from newspaper studies and research articles, from universities that have taken a look at different communities. You can get them from organizations that already provide support. If you want to know about the seniors living in a particular area, the senior centers that are there probably have some detail about that. This need statement that you put together, the need that you have identified, is one part of making a case for supporting your organization. And this is essential as part of your story that you're telling. So when you identify the need, the first part is making sure that that's clear to everybody who's going to be working with you. The second part of this is really, how are you as a nonprofit with your programs going to address this specific need? And if you've ever put together a grant proposal or worked on a grant proposal, you know that what I'm going to talk about here looks very similar to that. When you talk about your programs and what you're doing, you should lay them out in a way that shows what are the goals and objectives that your project needs to have. Briefly, what are the broad goals, the broad things you want to achieve to address the need in your community? And what are the specific objectives? And we say these are sometimes called SMART things. What are the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-limited things you're going to do this year and in the future to address this need? The reason why you should lay this out as clearly as possible, and by the way, this is sort of based on the idea of a logic model, meaning if I have these things in, I'm going to do these things, and outcomes, the things that happen, are going to be measurable after I do them. That logic of a program is something you need to think about early on, because when you start your programming, you may not have thought, well, okay, we're going to be feeding these kids after school, and we didn't remember to count them every time. Like, we should count them every day to make sure we know how many people we're coding. And we should find out, are they same kids each day, or they're different kids each day? The more information you gather about the services you provide, the easier you can put together what are your specific goals. If you know you've had 20 kids coming regularly and they're the same 20 kids, what's your goal for next year? What's your objective? Are you going to provide particular services? Are you going to make sure that you work with the food bank to provide nutrition? And how are you going to know whether you're successful or not? What did you set out to do? Well, if your objective was to feed 20 kids with 100 good meals, you can count that and measure that. But if your real goal, your overall goal is to make sure that they're healthier, how do you measure that? How do you keep track of it? This is tricky, and it is definitely part of program design and program understanding. The benefit of thinking of it as a logical thing, and we do teach a class specifically on logic models called our outcomes class, is that it helps understand what other people look at. If they want to invest in you, they want to know that if they put some money in, that what's going to come out is a specific success, a specific outcome, an impact that they want to make. So it's important to keep track of that early on and not just kind of keep doing things. Well, we have this much money. Let's do a few things here and we'll until our money runs out. That's a dangerous situation to get into because people don't want to invest in things that only happen when the money shows up. I have another poll for you. I'm just going to go to this and I'm going to ask Elizabeth to bring up this on the screen. True or false? Once I get my 501c3 status, I will get foundation grants. And I think Elizabeth has this open, right?
I do, and it looks like just about 30% of the room have participated thus far. So there's definitely a clear leader, but we'll see if we can get a couple more folks participating and see if that lead diminishes at all. And we have 75% of the room participating in our poll thus far. So I'm going to go ahead and close it and share those results. And Dave, I think you've been doing a good job because everyone here said false.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I didn't mean to, it was not to tease you to do this, by the way, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, a good 85% of you saying false. Once you get a 501c3 status, you might get foundation grants, but you might not. And that is the truth of it all. It doesn't guarantee you anything. It doesn't guarantee you donations, doesn't guarantee you foundation grants. It makes it possible legally for foundations to give you grants, but they don't have to. All right, so we're going to go back and explain this. Thank you very much for sharing.
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk about finances and fundraising. Because we were known as the Foundation Center for so long, a lot of people came into us and said, oh, yeah, I have got a nonprofit. Show me where to get the foundations to pay for all the different things that we do. And it's lovely when they do. But generally, before that happens, you have to be very clear about what's going to happen with your organization. First of all, you have to have a simple idea of what is the proposed budget for your organization. The budget should be the numerical representation of everything you've planned. When you have that goals and objectives and measurement, in order to get there, you have to know what is it going to cost to get you there. So far, if you make the case, you've justified it, but you haven't said, where is the money going to go? And I'll tell you, people with money who want to invest in you really want to know what that money is going to be spent on. So thinking about your proposed budget is an important thing to consider. Also important to consider is, where's your money going to come from? If you think a foundation is going to pay for 90 or 100% of what you do, that's very unlikely. Private foundations like to support what you do. They don't always like to support it every year. They don't always like to support general operating, which is the cost of doing business. Oftentimes, foundations want to support you and get you to a place, and then they want to kind of hold back and they don't want to keep funding you year after year. The places that do best are the ones that understand you should diversify the different sources of funding. You should think about all the other different places. And by the way, if you want to learn about diversifying your fundraising, you should take our free class, Introduction to Fundraising Planning. But the basic idea is individuals, your board members, your volunteers, people that you connect, they tend to be the people that give the most readily and the most regularly to a nonprofit. And oftentimes when you start up, you're going to be doing individual donation solicitations. You're going to be doing events. Maybe you're doing a crowdfunding kind of thing that enables you to get money to get started. And when a funder then looks at what you do, they want to make sure that you are getting public support. In fact, there's something called a public support test with checks to see, is your organization getting all its money from one place, which makes it a foundation, or is it getting support from the public? And that can come from donations. It can come from charging for the different services that you offer. It can come from a lot of different places. So the important thing is to be clear and to diversify, so that if you depend on one source and that one source goes away, you don't have to find somebody else who's going to step up and pay an awful lot. If you get a little bit from corporations and foundations and individuals and charging and maybe government and maybe United Way, it'll be a better situation. The other part of this is understanding, how do you keep track of this money? Because you can't just take it and put it all in a shoebox and put it under the bed. You have to be able to say, we are going to track where the money comes from. If you want to get people to donate large sums of money to you, you don't want to just have one person handle all the checks, keep the accounts, make the financial decisions, make the accounting. That's a recipe for disaster. And there are standard financial procedures that nonprofits should follow, that you should follow if you intend to continue to grow in your fundraising. Good place to find out about these financial procedures and the places that can help you is to get connected to your nonprofit organization, assisting organization in your state. Most states have an organization, an association of nonprofits that provides training, that also helps with other kinds of information. They can help you find out who's offering accounting in your area, specifically for nonprofits, who can help you out, who can get you connected. So I would encourage you to take a look around and identify your local, your statewide association of nonprofits and see if they can connect you to the right places if you're not sure. Also, of course, your board of directors and the people on there that know finances are going to be invaluable to you as you go further. So let's imagine you get all your finances figured out. There's still the idea that you have to reach the people that you are serving and reach the people that need to know about you. No one is going to support you if they don't know you exist. And relying on just one way to get the word out, we're just going to create a website and everybody's going to know, or we're going to create a Facebook page. You have to think about who's interested in what you do before you assume that you're going to be able to get to all of them. Like, are they kids under 18? Are you trying to reach kids under 18? Where do they get their information? Do they get it from Facebook? Not all of them, not a lot of them, as a matter of fact. Do kids under 18 read a print publication? Maybe you're trying to reach seniors over 65. Where do they get their information? Where do they find out what's going on in the community? Maybe the population you work with, they get their news from their church or from school or from the doctor's office, from the barber shop. Where do they pick up information about what's going on in the community? Think about the ways your clients might best find out about you. And don't just think in terms of, well, we got to hire a marketer that'll do that. Think about how you reach them. And do you track all the people who've been interested in the past? Because the ones who have come to your events, the ones who have sent you a donation, those are the people that you want to make sure you track so that you can keep in communication with them. If you intend to do this all yourself, it might be a problem. So think about the other nonprofits, the ones that you researched, the ones that aren't doing exactly what you're doing, but definitely serve the same people that you do. They can help you get the word out. You can share ways of marketing each other. You can share ways of spreading the word. They can pass something out for you. And the libraries and all the different places where people gather could be ways to do marketing that's not as sophisticated as a website or a Twitter account or any of those kind of things, but can be just or as effective or more effective. All right. If I haven't overwhelmed you with too much to worry about, I want to make sure I mention all these other things. Do you have any space to do your work? I hear a number of nonprofits a lot of the time who could get started if only somebody would buy them a building. And I have to say to them that buying a building is not the first thing that a lot of funders want to do for a nonprofit. So space is often shared. It's in a church basement, or it's shared with other nonprofits in a shared collaborative space. Maybe you do something out of your home for a while, and then it becomes something where you need to find a space you can use. But do you have enough space to do your work? Do you have enough equipment? Finding somebody who's just going to buy you all the equipment you need is difficult. Maybe you can get computers donated. Maybe you can share equipment with another organization. Insurance, that's one thing that your statewide nonprofit organization can help you identify. Who sells that? Do you need insurance? Because if you work with youth, you definitely need insurance, background checks. If you drive as part of what you're doing, you drive people to different places, people that do that need to get insurance. Even board members will sometimes ask for liability insurance so that they are not held responsible for any bad decisions that go on. And you can get all different kinds of insurance. Human resources, annual reporting. This is basically keeping track of how your organizations are run, what policies you have, making sure everything is uniform and organized, and making sure that you report to all the places you have to report to. The IRS requires an annual report from every existing 501c3. Doesn't have to be a long one necessarily, but you do have to annually report to them. States have to have reporting. If you fundraise in different places, you have to do a report. Who's going to do that? Who's going to keep track of all of that stuff? So, given all of that, what if you don't want to do a nonprofit? What if you're like, oh, geez, the more Dave tells me, the less I want to do this? Well, they're all alternatives. You can volunteer with an organization that does the kind of thing that you're interested in. You can find out whether it's something that you really want to put the work into by volunteering. Connect with your local volunteer matching organization, or find employment with an organization that does the kind of things that you are interested in to see if it's something that maybe they're living up to what you need to do. You can also serve on a board. So many organizations, as I said, are looking for board members, looking for good people that can help them out and do the work with them. So maybe the best step is to serve on a board. The last one here is fiscal sponsorship. And this one takes a little bit more of a description. But before you become a nonprofit organization, you can have a legal arrangement that will help you while you're doing it. And the basic thing that's described here, legal arrangement between a 501c3 and an individual or group, is simply you can partner with an existing charity, and that person, that organization will be responsible for your fiscal behavior. They will handle the money that you get, they will distribute it to you, and they will be responsible for it. It's something that new nonprofits, ones that are just getting started, often do so that they can get access to donations and grants. But it's not a one-step kind of process. There are a number of pitfalls beyond just setting up a relationship. Many fiscal sponsors don't do it for free. Many expect a cut of some of the grants that you get. Maybe there are other things that they expect. So I would encourage you, take a look at our GrantSpace website, grantspace.org, and take a look at a free video we have there, and you can just search the title, What You Need to Know About Fiscal Sponsorship. It's a great way to find out more if you want to explore this idea. So, in summary, what are the advantages of this? Well, one of the nice advantages is that if you start a nonprofit organization, you are eligible for public and private grants, and people donating to you can take a tax exemption or a deduction, though that law has changed recently, so not everybody does it the same way that they used to do. However, you're not going to be able to get public or private grants unless you are somehow affiliated or running a nonprofit organization. You'll also have the benefit of formal structure, by which I mean there is a structure where the board is in charge of the organization, but the board is not personally responsible. The board supports the mission. And as long as all the board members are doing what they're supposed to do, they're following the finances and they're making sure everything is taken care of, as long as they're doing their business, the due diligence, they have limited liability. So if the nonprofit goes bankrupt, that doesn't mean a board member goes bankrupt. That means it's just the nonprofit's structure. That's nice. That's an advantage. There are some disadvantages. It costs money. If you notice that back when we were talking about starting the nonprofit and filing with the IRS and filing with the state, there are costs involved in that. And a lot of the costs early on are not paid by grants, because nobody's going to give you a grant to get your 501c3 certification from the IRS. There's cost that is often paid by the individuals and the board members. There's also much paperwork, administration to get started, administration to keep going, to balance, to make sure you keep track of the board and how the organization is run and that you're keeping legal. And you share that control of the organization. It's not just you, it's your board. So 2 or 3 other people at least are going to have control, and they may decide that you are the odd person out and you are not the one they're going to agree with. And so they're going to do something slightly different than what you thought you were going to do in the first place. That's something that some people don't like. And then there's finally scrutiny by the public. Everything you do as a nonprofit is a public thing. You are reporting to the IRS information on your finances and the highest paid people at your organization and how much you spend on fundraising versus how much you spend on program. That's public. That's in the 990 that anyone can get access to through GrantSpace, GuideStar. You can find it a lot of different places online. So you get that public scrutiny, and anybody who wants to know about how well you run can take a look and do research on you and find out about that stuff. So a lot of people don't want that public scrutiny. So what are you going to do? Well, there's no one right answer to this. And I know that a lot of you are coming from different places. So there is no one thing that I'm going to be able to tell you. But the nice thing I can tell you is that at Candid, we have come up with a new resource, and it is called the Nonprofit Startup Assessment Tool. This tool is something that we created with the assistance from the Kauffman Foundation, several other foundations. We did this with participation from a national authority on nonprofits. We came up with an assessment of 75 questions that enable you to understand, should you move forward or not? It has 3 different rankings for the different sections of it: red, yellow, and green. Red, you need improvement before you move on. Yellow, you need some work. And green, you're on track. So what I'm going to do is bring this up in front of y'all. So I'm going to open the website here, and hopefully you'll be able to see this in just a bit. Yeah, so now you should see our GrantSpace website in front of you, grantspace.org, which I've been mentioning. Earlier, I mentioned that we have a lot of different resources on GrantSpace, including the knowledge base where you would find out about fiscal sponsorship or boards or any of the different things that you wanted to research. What I'm going to take you to is the nonprofit startup resources. These are helpful resources for starting a nonprofit. And the first link there is the nonprofit startup assessment. Now, in order to get access to this, you do have to log in. You have to register and create an account on GrantSpace. It's free. It's merely so that we can track and you can get back to what you need to get to. But once you log in, you're able to go to the assessment and fill it in at your leisure. You don't have to sit there and answer 75 questions in 10 different sections all at once. You can see what we're looking at here. All the different 10 sections have a way of getting started where you can find out information. You can fill in the different sections. You can say, I'm going to take the section on volunteers and board and fill out several questions related to this. And I'm going to say, no, I've not served on a nonprofit board, and it would not be very feasible and easy for me to put together a highly skilled board. I'm pretty sure that that would be difficult for me. And you can say, well, I'm not very confident in my knowledge of board management. And you can say, I don't know whether nonprofits are necessary, whether volunteers are necessary. You can fill out and answer these questions honestly, and you can keep filling them out, or you can take a look at some of the insights that you get. And this is just one section of insights. By the way, it's downloadable. You get a full PDF document of the downloadable stuff. But you can also find out, where are you? And you could have guessed by what I was filling out that I wouldn't score too high on this. I need significant improvement, at least in the volunteer and board area. And for each of the questions you answer, it gives you your answer, some insight about the best way to understand nonprofits for the different elements here, and then some resources you can click on as links to find out more information. This is a totally free resource. Takes about 20 minutes to fill out, 30 minutes maybe if you want to devote some time. But what you get out of it is a huge amount of detail and a huge guidance for where you need to go and what you need to learn. This is available for anyone who wants to get to it. It's on our grantspace.org website in the resources section under nonprofit startup resources. One other thing that's on that page before I move away from it completely is down at the bottom, and you may miss it. Take the nonprofit startup assessment. I really recommend you do that. But down further is a section on resources by region. And that's important because of the different states and the different laws that are there. We have assembled resources on nonprofits for every state in the United States. So you can click on them, find out different information about different states. For example, who can provide technical assistance to you in the state of South Carolina? Who can provide legal assistance to you? Is there a nonprofit association that works together? Together SC works to help nonprofits in the state. You can find out about the state agencies that handle what goes on with nonprofits. And finally, there are specific startup guides to nonprofits in each state. That's also in the resources, also in the nonprofit startup resources section. So I'm hoping that you think about all of these different things that we talked about today. And I'm going to turn this back over to Elizabeth so we can finish up here. But I hope you will take advantage of the resources that we have talked about. I hope you will take a look at the nonprofit startup assessment tool and find out where you really are, and then move forward in the way that makes the most sense for you. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth to come back and finish up here. So Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. We've been getting plenty of questions, and I promise we actually have quite a bit of time to get to most of them. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to submit those through the chat. But before we start digging in, I did want to share the link to the startup assessment tool as well as those state-by-state resources. And Dave, we have some folks on the line that have actually already started filling out that assessment tool and say that it's a fantastic tool at, both pointing out what you're really, really strong at and where you might be needing to put a little bit more attention to. So thank you to folks who've already started giving us that feedback. Additionally, I also wanted to share with everyone that we will be having a training on August 15th, where you will learn how to make a compelling case for creating social value within your current organization. So we'll be joined by Pixera Global, who's been working with some of the top corporations and their social intrapreneurs who have actually been starting programs that are dedicated towards social change within their current companies. So we'll share what actionable steps you can take to convince your organization's leadership and important stakeholders to invest in new programs around social change. But to get us started on our Q&A, we have a couple folks who I think might want to learn a little bit more about LLCs particularly. Again, noting that, Dave, you are not a lawyer, so we'll take whatever advice you can give us.
Sure.
But Emily wants to know, do you have advice for an existing LLC that is considering becoming a nonprofit? A lot of the resources that she's been finding is how to actually start a nonprofit, which is similar to our training here. But what's the difference in what you should be considering if you already have a business that's up and running that's considering that transition?
Well, if you have, not being a lawyer, I'm of course not going to go into that detail, but I will say that as you're considering whether or not it makes sense to switch from a for-profit to a nonprofit or to some other in between, some states will allow you to be a type of organization that is both a little bit nonprofit and both a little bit for-profit. You really should check and see what your state in particular is supporting in terms of that. But one thing that I tend to talk about is what's most important to you. Is it most important to you that you have the freedom that having a business enables you to do? You can always donate from your business and help people that way by making the grants and making the gifts and providing the assistance that people need outside of your general opportunities. Or is the mission of your organization really about helping the people and getting assistance yourself, not worrying about selling, not worrying about running a business and providing money to the people that have invested in you, but instead depending on grants and other support? You might want to consider, is what you do something that you would get financial support? You might talk to a couple of local grant makers. You might talk to someone else who does something similar in both the for-profit and nonprofit worlds, so that you can weigh that in the balance. I know people who have a deep concern for the community who decided to stay for-profit because they felt that they had a steady income to be able to make donations. And then I've had other people who said, well, it doesn't really enable us to do enough. We're going to change. We're going to transfer from being a for-profit to legally being a nonprofit organization. So it kind of depends on your situation. Definitely taking the nonprofit startup assessment tool will help you think through a lot of the concerns that a nonprofit would have and might point you in the right direction.
Thank you, Dave. We have another question that came in from Travis, and he wants to know how he can find out if there's already a nonprofit doing, the same work that he's interested in doing. So the
Sure.
example he gives is assisting high school students look for careers and job options. How does he
Sure.
find out if there's already someone doing that work?
The easiest thing to do for you probably would be finding out if there's a 211 service in your area. And you can actually Google this. You can just do 211 and then put the name of the city or state that you're in and see if there is a service locally. If you contact them and ask them who's doing this kind of particular work, they'll tell you whether or not there's one in your region, and they try and help you out. It's a lot of people use it as a call for help so they can get that kind of assistance, but maybe there's nobody doing that. Maybe you are going to be that person for them eventually. But the best way to find out is to try and find out by calling the 211 service. If you don't know if you have one, if you're not able to find it online and you're having trouble, call your local public library, call your local United Way, and ask them who might be the best place to go to find out about this.
Thank you, Dave. The next question that I wanted to pose to you is going to be a two-part question from Raphael. The
Okay.
first part is, can you start fundraising before you're an official legal nonprofit? And if so, do you need to document all of your fundraising efforts, your goals, your outcomes, etc.?
The short answer to that is yes, to both of them. But the longer answer is yes, you can begin to fundraise even before you're a legal nonprofit. And the way that the law is drawn is if you've been getting money that's been specifically devoted to that mission, there's a certain period of time where you can document that as income towards the nonprofit as you're getting the 501c3. However, a lot of people don't want to donate to you before you're a nonprofit because they can't get a tax exemption. And in the case of foundations, they can't be legal to give to you if you're not a nonprofit. So what they will ask you to do is to get a fiscal sponsor who will handle the money legally while you're in the process of getting a nonprofit. You may want to look at the fiscal sponsorship information to see if it's right for you. Regardless, if you are soliciting donations, you should keep track of those donations and solicitations early on and make sure if it's money that's been donated to the specific thing that you're starting your nonprofit to do, that it's dedicated to it. You can't just say, well, I wasn't yet a nonprofit, so I can have this money. It came to me, it's mine now. If you were raising it in the name of that nonprofit, you need to keep it with that. By the way, I'm not a lawyer. I mentioned that. The other thing that you can do as you get started is make sure that you get all the documentation you need to make the case for support. So as you're putting together your organization and waiting for the IRS to okay you, you can be putting together case statements and grant proposals and arguments about why you should get support so that you're ready to do the kind of solicitations you need to do. I definitely document the programs that you do and also how you're going to fundraise even before you're ready to do that. The more you have prepared before that becomes legal, the easier your life is going to be. Other
Thank you, Dave.
questions?
Yeah, we have plenty to go through. I actually wanted to revisit the idea of fiscal sponsorship here, and I think it might be relevant to the question that came in from Antonio. He
Sure.
actually is currently working for a nonprofit that's based overseas, but he wants to know if it's worthwhile to establish a U.S. branch and how should he go about doing that. And I think fiscal sponsorship might be relevant here, but I wanted to know if you have other suggestions.
Sure. The fiscal sponsorship is one way you could do that. You could partner with an organization that is a nonprofit in the United States, and they can help you fundraise for the different things that you're doing. There's a lot of laws that are specifically important to know about when you're internationally based because of the since 9/11, there's been a lot of care taken about where people are incorporated and where the money goes that is raised in one country and given to another country. We do have in Candid a lot of things related to international NGOs and non-NGO fundraising, nonprofit fundraising for organizations in other countries. My experience has been it's always easier to fundraise in the country that you're located in, but that does not mean that you can't find funders here that are willing to give internationally or that are willing to work with you if they believe in the need strongly enough. So I would explore um, partnerships. I would also explore whether you think it's worthwhile to start a nonprofit in this country, a branch of your international nonprofit. Elizabeth, I know that we have in our trainings a number of internationally related trainings, also in our resources in our knowledge base for international NGOs. So you might want to take a look in there as well.
Thank you, Dave. Um, I have a really great two-part question here from Lauren. Is there an average startup cost of a nonprofit? And two, what should be the very first thing that folks should be thinking about, programming or trying to get funding?
Wow, that's great. Those are great questions. One of those questions is actually one of the questions in the nonprofit startup assessment tool. So maybe I shouldn't give away the answer. But the first question is that how much does it cost? It can cost anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000. It can cost more. It can cost a lot less. Most of it depends on how much you're willing to donate yourself and how much donated time and money you're getting from other people. The cost does escalate because generally when you're first starting and you want to buy equipment for a particular service, or you want to buy sporting goods that are going to be used in your activities, the money has to come from somewhere, and that becomes a donation that maybe you use your credit card to make to your own organization. It can grow astronomically depending on what you need. So one of the things I would look into is who can you get to donate specific things? If you want to keep those costs down, you want to try and find out other people that can contribute to that. The other part of that question, can you repeat that, Elizabeth? The second part of the question?
Yes, in terms of first steps in regards to planning and really visioning all of this up, should the efforts be focused on fundraising or should most of your efforts really be looking at programming?
Most of your efforts should be looking at programming and making a connection between your programming and what a funder might be able to do. So fundraising and programming go hand in hand. As you talk about your programming and talk about what you're doing, you are making that part of that case to a funder because they care less about the fact that you need money and much more about who you are helping. I know a lot of grassroots nonprofits that haven't been officially 501c3s, but have been helping the community they're in for years. And that makes a much stronger case in terms of fundraising than somebody who spent a lot of time just writing a great grant proposal. Because a great grant proposal with nothing behind it, no programs, no organizations, no history, is just a great piece of writing. It's probably not going to be successful. But a nonprofit that has been doing services and helping people for years, even if they're still working towards getting that legal status and still working to putting their fundraising requests together, they're going to have more people already interested and willing to wait for you to get things together and to get the argument together if they know that what you're doing is doing the work that they are passionately concerned about. That's why sharing those values is such an important thing to start with, making sure that you're communicating the values that you believe in and providing a service that people care about.
Thanks, Dave. We have a question here about the nonprofit assessment tool from Nicomedes, and he wants to know if you're able to go back in and change and update your answers as you start, becoming an expert in areas you previously were not an expert in.
Yes, you absolutely can. That's one of the things. We had an older version of this that did not allow for that. And one of the problems was once you took the tool and answered it, you were stuck with all those answers that a lot of them might have been wrong. Nope, this is a totally flexible document. So you can fill it out now and you can see what your scores are. And in 6 months, you can log back in. That's why it's great to register so you can get back to this. You can log back in and edit your answers and change what you've said before and come up with a whole new series of recommendations. So do that. I recommend that you do that. Don't just say, well, it gave me all these reds. That must mean I shouldn't be a nonprofit person. It just may mean you need to do a little bit of learning. And in a couple of months, you go back and it'll be different.
Thanks, Dave. We have a very practical question coming in from Jeffrey. On average, how long does a 501c3 status take if the IRS approves the paperwork the first time around?
Oh, that's really good. That's a good question because it's changed. We used to say 6 to 18 months, which is a long time. But that was before the IRS began to speed up some of the processing time of the 1023. And they came up with a form called the 1023-EZ for smaller organizations. And by the way, if you're not sure which one to fill out, go to irs.gov. It will tell you. It will tell you the difference between the forms and why you should fill one or the other. So I have heard of people who have gotten their 501c3 status in as little as 3 months. That doesn't mean that you will. It just means that it's possible to get it a lot faster than before. Still, you need to take care with those forms. You can't assume that it's going to be expressed. And even sometimes if you filled it out real fast and you got it real fast, that doesn't mean it's everything you want it to be. So take care with those forms when you submit it and give the IRS time to give feedback to you and maybe ask for a revision so that you are all on the same page and you're able to do it legally without any worries. But yeah, it's going faster.
And we have a really great question that came in from Aaron, and he wants to know, when you're looking to know which state to incorporate in, what do you need to consider? Is it best practice to always incorporate in the state where most of your work will be taking place, or do you want to incorporate in all of the states where all of your programs will be taking place?
That's a great question. I had that question asked when I was doing this program with an expert on nonprofit incorporation, a legal expert, a lawyer. And that answer that he gave was like, oh, it's like about a half an hour. But I'm going to try and summarize and say the easiest way to do it is to incorporate where you are. There are arguments, just like there are arguments for starting a business about the laws in different states. But for the most part, when you are providing services in an area and trying to fundraise, you're probably going to be working locally, even if you ideally are going to be a national or international organization. You're first going to be looking locally for support. It's easier to find local support if you're incorporated locally, if they can find you and talk to you and get you on the phone and all that kind of stuff. Part of the law of fundraising is that if you are going to fundraise in a particular state, you need to register with that state. But it's easier to work from one state to other states and from the one that you're in. So that's my advice. It is not necessarily legal advice, because depending on your nonprofits, you may get a different opinion from your lawyer. But from my experience, you find out a lot more about what's going on, and you get connected to the funders that are most likely to fund you by starting in the state you're in.
Thanks, Dave. And again, I'm going to repeat that you are not a lawyer before I ask you this next question, but to your best guess or
We've
best advice
established that, right?
on where to get more guidance, Phyllis wants to know if it is legal to use some of the money that you've raised to actually maintain your organization or individuals, such as, purchasing t-shirts to sale and paying for a venue to hold an event.
Sure. Yeah, I knew somebody was going to ask me a legal question or something like that. I just to trap me, but don't worry about it. I'm going to try and answer this question. The IRS actually defines income, and they have what's called unrelated business income. So when you're fundraising for your organization, if what you are fundraising with and the way that you're doing it is unrelated to your mission, meaning let's say you're selling t-shirts, and I'm just using it as a random example. You're selling t-shirts. The t-shirts don't have anything to do with your mission. They're not furthering your mission. They're just t-shirts that you're using to make money. And they have a cost that's outside of the cost of other things, and that you need to spend money on making the t-shirts. That might be, according to the definitions of the IRS, unrelated business income. Whereas if you're selling a service, so you're providing tutoring services and you charge $50 an hour for them, and somebody gives you $50 to pay for an hour of tutoring, that's directly related to your mission. So that's income that is direct for the organization. The reason why they divide that up is that sometimes you may have to pay taxes on some of the other income that you get. It's not treated all the same. It's important that you work with your accountant. And again, I'm not going to say that I'm not an accountant either. We know that too. But it's important that you work with your accountant to understand how is what you're fundraising for connected to what you're doing, and how is the money credited when somebody donates. I'm sure you've had that experience when you've donated to a nonprofit organization and it tells you a certain percentage of what you donated is tax deductible. That tends to be related to whether you got something else in that was not related to the mission connected to it. Like, I donated to you, I got this great t-shirt. Well, the cost of the t-shirt was deducted from your donation. It's not part of that tax deductible donation. It gets really complicated really fast. So there is a publication that the IRS publishes about unrelated business income, and I encourage you to read it or work with a lawyer that has read it before you get too deeply into that. But being clear where the money's going when you fundraise and what it was for is vital. I stunned Elizabeth. Okay, there she is.
No worries. So Tiffany here wants to ask a question. She currently is part of a for-profit business, and she wants to know if she's able to seek a fiscal sponsorship from a nonprofit and can apply for grants on her own to directly benefit her mission, or will all of the funds go through the sponsor? So I think there's a little clarification here on, fiscal sponsor versus fiscal sponsee and who can play what role.
Right. So you're a for-profit business. You can get a fiscal sponsor who will be handling the money. So the fiscal sponsor is the organization to whom the money will go, and then from them they can give you this. I'm doing it in very, very short form here. Yes, most of the people who get fiscal sponsorship are either individuals, for-profit businesses, or nonprofits that are in the process of becoming a nonprofit. You partner with the fiscal sponsor because you want a legal way for a foundation or other people to give that means that their gift is tax deductible. Some things are important though. If your mission is not a charitable mission, and it is not linked to the mission of that fiscal sponsor, you may run into problems. There has to be a connection between your organization and that fiscal sponsor. There has to be a way that you share so that they can legally accept a donation for the kind of thing that you're doing. There's a lot of subtlety to this. Um, there are some great books out there published about fiscal sponsorship, but the stuff that we have on our website in the knowledge base takes into account not only the nice thing about fiscal sponsorship, but some of the pitfalls. If you don't have a good working agreement with the sponsor that you find, you could run into a lot of trouble. They could take over your project without you approving that. They could decide to take more money than you expected. You have to have a good contract agreement with them. So for anybody getting into fiscal sponsorship, it's not a good idea to do it all based on a handshake. You need to do a much clearer agreement between you and that organization. But the short answer for a for-profit company is yes, you can do that.
Thanks, Dave. We had a really interesting question come in from Alexandre regarding the planning stages of really thinking through your nonprofit. And what he wants to know, is it more difficult to develop an innovative plan for your nonprofit, or are you more likely to get funding if you're replicating what other organizations are already doing?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part.
Yeah, is it more difficult to get support if you're developing a new innovative plan and new approach for how your nonprofit will work? Or are you more likely to get support if you're replicating what other organizations are already doing?
That's a terrific question. The question about, one of the things that I hear from a lot of different funders is there are too many nonprofits. That's what I hear they say. Don't encourage people to become nonprofits because there are too many of them. They say this in their private moments. Not all of them, but some of them. And the thing is, though, they want to be able to support organizations that are helping address a need. And if you're addressing something innovatively, a need that maybe has not been identified, there are going to be funders that are going to be excited by that. They're going to hear what you have to say and say, well, that's great. I don't know anybody who's doing that. I would love to support that. I mean, ideally, that's what they would say. More often than not, what you're doing is subtly improving or subtly expanding a model or something that is already in existence. And sometimes it doesn't, you can't always tell whether you're being innovative or not. When I started 10 to 15 years ago, and I would talk to people who were looking to start a nonprofit, I talked to a lot of people who were coming, and to be honest, they were coming straight out of prison and they were saying they couldn't get jobs. They were unable to find, and so they wanted to start a nonprofit that would make it possible for people coming out of prison to learn trades and to get jobs. At the time, that wasn't a very common thing. Nowadays, I know of a lot of organizations, at least 3 or 4 here in Cleveland, that are building everything they do on that and are getting tons of support about it. But at the time, it was very innovative to think that way. And sometimes you don't know when you're being really innovative. If you focus on the need, if you focus on addressing the need, chances are a funder is going to be able to tell you, number one, if anybody else is doing it, and number two, if it's a real need that they understand. So I always make sure that I do my homework and then I talk to maybe a community foundation in your area, maybe one of the funders that's more approachable, a program officer. It's a good idea to get their input. And they can help you sometimes. They can say, well, there's a great model for that, but we don't have anything like that here. It's out in San Francisco. And you might make your life a little bit easier. And at the same time, win the attention of that funder. Don't do what every funder tells you to do. I mean, but listen to hear, do they know something that might be able to help you? Just because you want to be innovative and you want to be radically new doesn't mean that somebody else can't help you with something that they've done somewhere else. The important thing is not to duplicate, but to address the real need in the community. So good luck with that.
Thanks, Dave. So we have a great question that came in from Nora, and she wants to know if there can be overlap between board members and staff members, and more specifically, can board members be paid?
Ooh, okay. First question is yes, there can be. There doesn't have to be. And some funders, some people, and we do look at it a lot of the times from the point of view of a funder. Some funders will say, why? Why is your staff on your board? I've known board, at least in the state of Ohio, the law is that you can have 3 board members, as little as 3 board members, and at least 2 of them have to not be on the staff, which means one of them can be on the staff. And that works fine if you want a really limited kind of thing that doesn't bring in as many points of view as possible. I would say in general, I've heard from funders that they either don't want very many people who are staff members on the board, or they don't want any. Legally, it's possible. Is it something you should do? Not necessarily. And I've heard people go either way, but not necessarily. The second thing is you never pay your board members. No, if you're, I'm sorry, I just went out of control there. If you're a nonprofit, you don't get paid as a board member. If you're a nonprofit, your board should donate to your organization, and ask anybody who has talked to a couple of foundations, how many people, if you have 10 people on your board, how many of them should donate financially to your organization? It should be 10. They should not be getting paid. Now, you got a staff member that's also a board member. That becomes complicated because you could pay a staff member, they could also be on the board, but just because they're on the board, they're not going to get paid. So I don't mean that to be harsh, by the way. It's just that it's asking for a lot of trouble if your board members are getting paid.
Thanks. And then just coming back to a very simple clarifying question. Do you have to incorporate in order to form a nonprofit?
No, you can be a nonprofit based on how you're structured. It depends on who defines the word nonprofit. If you want it legally defined, the IRS, the federal government, defines it one way, and your state defines it another way. You can go and be incorporated in your state and never get federal designation as a public charity. You don't have to do that. I know a lot of people who have worked in the community for years who have talked to me about becoming a nonprofit because they could get grants and because they could do things, they could do things the way that other people do it, but they like the freedom. They like the ability to provide a service without worrying about that as a legal status. So yeah, nonprofit work goes on all the time. People volunteer, people do it as a formal way. People become, they help out in the community. You pick up litter, you're doing nonprofit work in the community. But if you want it to be a legal thing that enables people to give you grants, that enables people to take tax deductions, then you have to go through the process.
Thanks, Dave. And Maurita is asking for us to kind of return to the conversation regarding shareholders and corporations. So she wants to know if you can clarify what status the shareholders in a corporation can have when there's a nonprofit that's being incorporated. I'm assuming that we were referring to the board, but if you could just provide some clarification.
Yeah, it's nonprofits don't really have shareholders because if it's a for-profit organization, you can have shareholders, but nonprofits don't have that because the way that the money is handled in nonprofits is different. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I will say that in any for-profit organization that has a nonprofit arm or has a nonprofit connection, there has to be a distinct difference between how the money is handled for the nonprofit and charitable work and how the money is handled for the for-profit work. Because you can't raise money for a nonprofit and then pay people who work for you just dividends from that. It can't be that kind of, it's not a shareholder sort of thing. That's why when you have a hospital, a hospital is a nonprofit type organization. When they fundraise, they raise money for the hospital for charitable work. Well, when a hospital goes out of business, it has to create a separate nonprofit organization. If it raised money for charitable purposes, it can't just pay off all the people who still work for the hospital and say, okay, we're done now. The money has to go for charitable purposes. So a lot of the times you'll find hospitals turning into foundations. In fact, there's a name for that called a conversion foundation, because they've had to keep that money separate and in the charitable world. That's
Thanks,
as
Dave.
legally complex as I can get.
Yep. We got some clarification. So if the nonprofit is started by a corporation that got the tax exemption status, what happens to the corporation shareholders? Again, might be out of your wheelhouse, but I wanted to provide the clarification.
Oh, it was started by a corporation, and they got a 501c3. So as long as that, as I'm understanding it, and again, it might be out of my wheelhouse, so we'll see. That doesn't mean I won't answer the question. It just means that I'm not legally there. But yeah, if it's started by a corporation and it is a separate nonprofit organization, a lot of the times the people that are involved in the corporation might also be people running that nonprofit, but it's still a completely separate business. So if you go to a funder that is a bank, for example, and you go to the bank and the bank has people that run it, you often see some of the same people that are part of the bank as administrators of that fund, if that nonprofit wing of that bank, that nonprofit part. It's a separate thing. Even though they work for the bank, their money doesn't cross over. Once money is given to a nonprofit, it stays in the nonprofit. It can't come back to the bank. So I think, as I'm understanding it, what you're asking is what happens to the shareholders. The shareholders can be part of the new organization and part of the old organization, but they can't mix that money or that role together.
I'm going to pose our final question for today, and that's coming in from Deandra, and she wants to know if there is an exact route needed, or is it possible to start a nonprofit that will serve more than one state? And I guess what she means is there a particular way to apply for incorporation when you are serving more than one state?
That's a good question. I would say that the important thing to get nonprofit status on the national level, if that's what you're going for, is to incorporate in at least one state. You might want to incorporate, there's a lot of people that are in cities, for example, that are on borders, Cincinnati, for example. And you can incorporate in Kentucky or you can incorporate in Ohio. It doesn't matter so much to the IRS as long as you're following the directions and the mission and are clear about who you serve. So just know that you don't have to incorporate in both places in order to get your 501c3, but you might want to choose which it makes the most sense based on the number of people that you serve and maybe the ease of it or the structure of your organization. Most of those NOLO books I mentioned a long time ago that talk about starting a nonprofit also give you the details of incorporating in each state, as does that map that's on GrantSpace in the startup resources.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. We still have plenty of questions that have come in, so I highly recommend that all of you folks reach out to our online librarians. Again, if you go to grantspace.org, you'll see the Ask Us tab, and if luck has it, you might actually catch Dave as one of our online librarians, and he can offer
And
you way more advice on there.
don't be surprised that if you haven't filled out the nonprofit startup assessment tool yet, don't be surprised if the answer to your question is in there, because a lot of them are.
Yeah, definitely. On behalf of our team here at Candid and Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. If you like this webinar, we hope that you join us again soon. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you again.